Okay, good morning, everyone, and welcome to the NSA's Breakfast Club in March. I know we're in the middle of lambing time, and that's going to affect some people, but as ever, we've got the playback facility on this. It is recorded, and it will be available on the NSA website pretty soon after the end of today. So welcome, everyone. This morning, we've got, I'd really like to welcome Janet Hughes. Janet Hughes is the Director for the Farming and Countryside Programs for England within Defra, and we'll hear from Janet in a moment or two. Before I start, I'd just like to thank both Roythorns and Rathbones for their sponsorship of today's Breakfast Club webinar. Roythorns are leading agricultural lawyers, and Rathbones are investment managers. And again, I'd like to thank you very much for your sponsorship. The plan for today really is that I'll just give a very brief introduction, and then I'll pass over to Janet, who will outline what's going on within some of the new schemes, and then we'll open up to questions and discussion. We've got one or two pre-submitted questions, and if people can put their questions in the Q&A, if you need to put them in the chat, we'll be watching both the Q&A on the chat, but if you can keep them in Q&A, we'll keep a close eye on them. So Janet, a huge welcome to you, and thanks very much for joining us again this morning. You are the Director for the Farming and Countryside Programs in Defra, looking very much at those new programs from England. You know, we're in the middle now of a transition, approaching a third of the way, I guess, through our agricultural transition. And, you know, others in Defra share this responsibility, but Defra has a massive load on its shoulders. And as an individual, I guess you share some of those responsibilities with other senior Defra staff. If you think of the title, Environment, Food and Rural Affairs, each of one of these has got massive challenges to deal with. Climate change to begin with, you know, achieving net zero, reducing emissions, increasing our storage of carbon, even getting accurate and consistent inventories and footprinting tools for us to be able to measure our carbon footprints. You know, massive challenges on that front. Our natural resources of water, air and soil, again, you know, they're all, none of them are in the sort of condition that we want them to be. And I would say water in particular, definitely responsibility doesn't all fall on agricultural shoulders there. But, you know, massive challenges in terms of cleaning up our natural resources. Our landscape and nature, again, you know, anyone who watched the Wild Isles on Sunday night, the Attenborough program, you know, you can see what potential Britain has in terms of nature. But we also hear regularly that our nature is the most depleted in Europe. So we've got a huge amount to do in terms of rebuilding nature. Food, you know, another key responsibility of Defra, and we're in the middle of a real food security challenge. In climate terms, looking forward, you might argue that Britain's in a position to be able to play a bigger role in terms of producing food, but how on earth do we balance that with some of our environmental ambitions? And then there's a whole rural affairs bit as well, you know, and, you know, there's a massive topic in itself for us. I guess that includes our farming communities, massive challenges there. And I guess that's where a lot of these programs come in terms of trying to make sure that, you know, our farmers across the country are supported, and we've got the choice, the chance, I guess, the opportunity to continue for their businesses to continue to succeed. The challenge overall is absolutely massive, and the farming and countryside programs are going to be a key tool in trying to allow us or help us to meet that challenge. So, you know, I don't want to put too much weight on your shoulders, because I know you feel it already from time to time, but welcome to you to this morning's Breakfast Club, and let me pass over to you to give us a bit of an overview of what's going on and what we can expect in the future as well. Janet.
Thanks very much, Phil, and thanks everybody for dialing in, and thanks for having me this morning. As you say, I've got quite a big job in Defra. I'm responsible for the part of what you were talking about there, that I'm responsible for, along with my colleagues in the programme and in the Rural Payments Agency and other Defra group organisations, is that we're taking England out of the Common Agricultural Policy. And that means we're phasing out all of the subsidies, policies and schemes of the Common Agricultural Policy, and we're instead investing the money in 3 sets of outcomes. We want to support food production and maintain that at current levels. We want to support farming and improve the productivity of the sector overall, and make sure that the sector is competitive and thriving, and that farm businesses are competitive and thriving. And we want to see bigger and better outcomes for the environment and climate. So we're reinvesting the money, the £2.4 billion a year, that we would have spent primarily on subsidies. Each year we're reducing the subsidies and instead spending it on those 3 outcomes. And there are 3 sets of things that we're doing in our programme. The first is the most important thing in some ways, which is we're trying to transform the way that we interact with farmers and the service that we offer to you. And that includes both our regulatory services and our schemes and payments and grants. And what we're trying to do is make all of those things fairer and more proportionate in the way that we control them, the rules around both regulations and schemes. We're trying to make them simpler and clearer and more accessible so that everybody can understand what it is that's available to them, what it is that they need to do, and crack on with it without having to plough through yards and yards of policy speak or confusion. And we're trying to make it quicker for you to get your business done so that you can reasonably expect a response within a normal business period of time from us. If you've got a question or you want to apply for a grant or you want to apply for a scheme, and we can turn things around quickly and in a professional way. And we want to do all those things so we can build trust with you. And we know that in the past we haven't always earned your trust because of the way that we've operated in terms of our controls and our administration. And so we're on a journey. I wouldn't say we're all the way there yet, but we have made a lot of progress. We've changed the way that we manage inspections in relation to cross compliance and schemes to make the way that we do that give the inspectors a bit more discretion. We don't leap straight away to a penalty for any breach at all. We'll often have a conversation or issue an advisory note rather than having a punishment immediately like we're marking your homework. And we're trying to take a more partnership based approach really. And we've started to get some good feedback from some of those changes, but we know we've got a way to go, and we're always keen to hear from farmers what's working and what isn't, because we're constantly looking for ways to make our services for you better. So that's our kind of service transformation. Then we've got 2 sets of money that are available. We've got one-off grants, where we've got a range of different grants that are available to support improvements in animal health and welfare, which will be particularly relevant to colleagues here, to support improvements in productivity and to support research, innovation and development. And we've got a page on gov.uk, search for funding for farmers on gov.uk, and you'll find there an up-to-date list of what the grants are, and you'll be able to link to when they're open for applications and what they include. And part of what we're doing to improve the service there is trying to move to a position where all the grants are in the same place on the internet and you can find them all, and you don't have to pay somebody to tell you what's available or interpret our funny policy names that we've got for all our different grants, but you can just find them all in one place. That's quite complicated to deliver. We have at least now got one page where you can find them all, and we will eventually have one service where you can apply for them all and where you can apply for all the schemes that I'm about to outline as well. So that's the grants. We've got £168 million available in this current year through grants, and we've published a list of what all of the different grants are that are going to be available throughout the whole year, to tell you in advance what's coming, because we know that farmers don't like it when we suddenly reveal a grant and you've only got a few weeks to apply and you weren't quite ready. So we've given you some advance notice. So do take a look at that, and you can see in advance what's coming and plan ahead. And that's one of the aspects of service improvement, is that we haven't done a good enough job in the past of giving you information far enough in advance so that you can plan ahead, because we know you plan in cycles of several years, not a few weeks on the whole. So take a look at the grants, 168 million available this year. And then finally, we've got a set of schemes where we give you ongoing payments and capital grants for environmental improvements alongside food production. And it's really important to say that we're not asking you to choose between food production and environmental goods. We're saying that you can do both, and we must do both, because for farming to be sustainable and resilient, and for your business to be sustainable and resilient, we've got to take care of the soil, we've got to take care of the natural environment we rely on, and also for the environmental outcomes that we want to achieve, as Phil mentioned, around biodiversity improvements, water quality improvements, air quality improvements, climate change mitigation and adaptation. It's farmers that we need to deliver the work that needs to be done in the countryside to help us achieve those goals, because you look after 70% of the countryside between you in England, and that's where we need to take action to look after our soil, our hedgerows, our trees, our grassland, in order to achieve these outcomes. And we want that to go hand in hand, and there are lots of farmers already leading the way, particularly in the sheep sector actually, showing how you can have farming and food and the environment going hand in hand for a resilient, profitable business. And what we want is to be able to spread that good practice around the sector, and we want to use our investment to help you to do that. So you're making decisions which are good for the farm, good for food production, and good for the environment at the same time. So we've got 3 schemes that will pay you to take actions alongside food production to take care of the environment, and which ones you want to go, you can go into whatever combination of these schemes you want to do, depending on how you want your business to operate. If you want to get involved in long-term, large-scale habitat restoration, river restoration and protection, deep and meaningful kinds of conservation alongside food production, then landscape recovery is probably the scheme for you. And that's a bespoke set of contracts where you will bid, probably along with other farmers. Most of the people in this scheme are groups of farmers working together, including tenant farmers, I should say, as well as landowners and other types of land managers, working together and coming into an agreement that's going to be, say, 20 years in duration. And it's going to include everybody working together across a whole area to achieve really big outcomes. Those are bespoke projects. We're about to open another round for applications in the spring. And if you're interested in that, look for landscape recovery on gov.uk or on our blog, defrafarming.blog.gov.uk. I'll put the links in the chat towards the end of the conversation, and have a look at when you can next apply. So that's if you're at the kind of long-term, large-scale end of the spectrum. For lots of people, what you'll be more interested in is a countryside stewardship scheme. We've already got that scheme. It's already up and running. We've made quite a lot of improvements to it in recent years. We've put some extra options into it. We've made the options that are there clearer to understand, easier to engage with, and more flexible. We're going to be adding more options into that scheme next year. And we've also improved the application process for that scheme. So if you're applying for it this year, you should be able to complete your application much more straightforwardly and quickly than you've been able to do in previous years. I was having a look at the new service yesterday, and it's much better. I think you'll be the judge when you log in, but it was very complicated, and people were having to pay somebody else to fill the form in for them, and you shouldn't have to do that now with that service. And there's a whole range of options there, and it tends to be in countryside stewardship options which you can do around your farming. So if you've got some existing habitat, if you've got some hedgerows, if you've got some water courses, you want to put some ponds in, do some natural flood management, those sorts of options are there for you in the countryside stewardship. That's open. That will be open for applications next week for agreements to start in January 2024. So I really encourage you to take a look at that if you're not in already. And if you're in a higher level stewardship agreement from this year, you can have a countryside stewardship alongside that. So I know if you're in the uplands in particular, which you may well be, if you're growing sheep, then you may well be in HLS already. You can either extend your HLS and then transfer across to countryside stewardship if you want to, and we've made it possible to do that with no gap now, because it used to be the case that you might finish your HLS in February and not be able to start CS until January. We've changed that rule now, so you can transfer smoothly. But if you want, you can stay in your HLS and also have a countryside stewardship agreement if you want to do more and get paid more. So if you're worried that you're already in a scheme and there's no more options available to you, then we have sorted that problem for you, and you can now do more. And the final scheme is Sustainable Farming Incentive, which you may have heard of. And we opened that new scheme. That scheme is for actions that can be taken anywhere, fairly straightforwardly. There's no bespoking that's needed for different areas of the country. Really, you shouldn't need any advice. You should be able to apply without having to take any advice or pay anybody to give you any advice. And it's things that you can do in the course of your farming. So if you've got arable land or improved grassland, then you can go into SFI and get paid to take care of your soils, doing actions like adding organic matter, testing your soil content, keeping the ground covered over winter. And if you've got moorland, you can get paid to assess the condition of your moorland by looking at what's the depth of the peat, what's the potential for environmental goods to be produced. That offer is quite limited at the moment because last year was our kind of initial foray into offering this scheme and service, and we only just started making BPS reductions. This year, we're going to very significantly expand that scheme. So from this summer, you'll be able to, if you're in the scheme, you'll be able to add these things in. If you're not in yet, you'll be able to apply for the full range of these things from the summer. And that we're now going to pay for a whole range of another 19 actions in the scheme, all of which can be adopted in a grassland or upland setting, depending on what features you've got on your farm. So we've got a low input grassland standard, we've got nutrient management, pest management, hedgerows, and one or two other things. What you'll see is that some of those options are similar to existing options in countryside stewardship, but they're more flexible in terms of eligibility and the way that you complete the actions, and it's more straightforward to enter. And for tenant farmers, which I know many sheep farmers will be, the SFI has short agreement lengths, it's 3 years, but even if you're on a shorter tenancy than that, even if you're on a 1-year rolling license that operates like a tenancy, you can still come into the scheme. So if you're a tenant farmer looking after sheep and you haven't previously looked at these schemes, then I really encourage you to take a look at SFI. You don't need a landlord's permission. You can have a short agreement length. All you have to say is, I expect to have management control for the 3 years. And if you lose management control unexpectedly, then you can leave without penalty. So I really encourage you to take a look, because we've made it flexible specifically to make it possible for you to come in if you haven't been able to do before. So have a look at Sustainable Farming Incentive on gov.uk and see what's there, and look out this summer. And we'll be running a whole load of road shows, webinars, turning up all the agricultural shows and various auction marts and other things with leaflets and people like me smiling and ready to engage if you've got questions about it. So we look forward to seeing you at some of those, hopefully, including the National Sheep event, which I very much enjoyed last year, and I'm looking forward to coming to again. So I think I'll stop there. The one other thing I want to say is the way we're doing this is much more in collaboration with farmers than we've ever done before. So I'm out and about all the time talking to farmers, trying to learn about what's it going to take for these reforms to actually work for you in real life. We do lots of work to we call it co-design, but what we mean is just working with farmers to work out how can we do this, what's it going to take for this to really work. And we don't please everybody all the time through that process, and we're never going to, because everybody doesn't agree with each other. So if you've heard somebody grumbling about having been involved in that and we didn't do exactly what they wanted, I'm afraid that is going to happen sometimes, but we think it's worth it because it's so important for us to understand as deeply as we can the diversity of the sector and the things that the context you're operating in and the things that you need in order to make these things work. So I hope you'll see, as we progress through this process, things improving based on your feedback. So we've redesigned SFI pretty much from the ground up for this year based on feedback we've had in the pilot and in the early rollout of the scheme, to make it much more flexible for you to pick and mix the things that you want to do, and much more straightforward, and to improve the prices. And we are constantly looking to improve based on your feedback. So if you're skeptical about that, I can understand why you would be, because often people ask for your opinion and just ignore you. We are absolutely serious about this, because we cannot succeed unless we make these things work for you. And so there's no point designing a scheme that doesn't work for you, because you're not going to take it up, are you? And then nothing will happen. So we are absolutely deadly serious about this. So please, if you haven't participated so far, take a leap of faith and give us a chance and come and have a chat when you see us at one of the shows or at an auction mart or whatever, and do get involved, because everybody who does helps make it better for everybody else. So thank you, and thanks again for having me. Looking forward to questions.
Right. It's a pleasure, and thanks very much for that overview as well. And I know I sent you a copy of the article that we ran in the last Sheep Farmer magazine, where we went back to 2016 and 17, where we, along with other farming organisations, came up with our sort of thoughts and plans about what we'd like to see. And I've been involved in many of these programs from those early days of design, of the start of design, I guess. And I've always been aware that actually a lot of what we called for is starting to come to fruition. We talked very much about the need for a holistic overview and some farm planning, and to an extent you can get that through the Resilience Fund, through business planning, and even carbon footprints. We talked a lot about reward for public goods and the need for us to combat climate change and nature. We talked a lot about sheep health and the need for capital investment on farms as well. So we're starting to see I think a lot of what we felt we wanted to see come to fruition. I'd also say that you and your team and the RPA have been fantastic in terms of meeting with a group of NSA officers who are involved with the SFI pilot. I think you personally have attended every one of those meetings late into the evening, and have listened. And I think where possible, you're taking people's views on and making changes as well.
And we're hugely grateful to that, to NSA as an organization for the I know it's frustrating at times engaging with us in government, because sometimes things don't go according to plan, and we have various sort of bits of excitement and turmoil and all that kind of thing, and we can't always do everything that you'd like us to do immediately. But I'm really glad that you can see it's going in that direction, that you can see that evidence, and we're so grateful to those who do dial into those evening meetings or take part in the pilot or take part in co-design, because that's how every time I meet farmers, I learn I find another issue that I didn't know about before that I can now go and sort out with the team, and that's how we make things better day by day.
I want to pick up on a phrase, if I can. I hope I'm not abusing your confidence by doing this, but in our last SFI meeting, you used a phrase which I love, which you said that you thought we might be at peak confusion, and we talked a lot in the past about peak oil and peak this and peak that, but peak confusion, and I don't think there's any doubt at the moment people are confused out there. And maybe, I mean, the good thing about peak confusion is that we're expecting to come down the other side, I guess. And you talked a little bit about simplifying things, but I think we've got a real job to do to try to get farmers back on side again and not be so confused and not just turn their back on things because they just don't understand things. So simplification is going to be really important going forward.
Yeah, I think that's right. So I think we made a decision, which was that we were going to, rather than running the existing schemes up to a point and then cranking a big handle and putting all the new things in place, which would have been very disruptive for everybody and a very risky way to do delivery, because normally when government and other organizations do delivery in that way, something goes wrong. You don't want to do you wouldn't change your farming system wholesale overnight from one day to the next and expect to have nothing go wrong. You'd expect to see, you'd normally do it incrementally. So we decided to do it incrementally. And part of that was about taking BPS down incrementally rather than just taking it away overnight. And that was based on our research about how long it was likely to take the industry to be able to adapt to the BPS going down and moving across to schemes instead. But what that means is we're running the existing schemes as we also try and scale up the new ones, and particularly SFI, and that means there's some overlap between the two and there's complexity between the two. And I think layered onto that, we had some political uncertainty, didn't we, towards the end of last year, where I had 3 different bosses in 3 months, which was slightly more exciting than I like my working life to be. We engage with it positively with civil servants. That's what we're here to do. But it was a lot of uncertainty over a period of time, and that's that in the context of the wider uncertainty facing the sector and the volatility in income in input prices and output prices at the moment, and the uncertainty around the global economy and commodity prices and trade and all of that uncertainty and climate change and all of the different things that are facing the sector. I think it's definitely peak uncertainty and peak complexity at the moment. So what we're now trying this year is all about. We've provided some clarity about what we're going to pay for now. We published in January, if folks haven't seen that, we published a document setting out everything we're going to pay for through countryside stewardship and SFI, and how much we're going to pay. So you can see now what's coming and how much is going to be available, and start thinking about what you want to do on your farm through these schemes. We've published the list of grants that we're going to offer this year, so you can see that and plan ahead now. What we've now got to do is make sure that the schemes that we're offering hang together as a coherent whole, because we've been in the habit of proliferating lots of different grants, lots of different schemes, and it's really difficult for anybody to see what's the range of different stuff that's relevant to me. What we're trying to do is bring that together gradually into a single service where you can log on and see everything that's relevant to you and easily access it. You don't need to know what the scheme is called. You just need to know, I want to get a cattle crush. How do I do that then?
It's really interesting you say that, because in our very initial suggestions or proposals back in 2017 or so, we did say that. We said that ideally for a farmer, they want to have a plan. They probably should come up with a plan that outlines their resources, outlines what their ambitions are for their farm and for their farm business, identifies areas that they can improve environmentally, identifies the areas where they need investment. And in an ideal world, they would present that plan to you in a uniform way, and they wouldn't give a damn about which Defra box it fit into, And at the moment, they're faced with all these different plans, all these different schemes, and they're struggling to find their way through.
Yeah, and planning is a really important one, because we tend to see the more profitable farms, those are correlated with those farms will much more be likely to do things like business planning, risk management planning, attending discussion groups, benchmarking, those sorts of business practices, and there's definitely a correlation between those two. And we think that if you do business planning, you're more likely to be able to be profitable, because you have a better understanding of your profit and loss, your fixed costs and your opportunities. That's why we're offering the resilience advice, which, if you haven't seen that, we will pay for somebody to come to your farm and sit with you and go through your books and look at what is your situation, what would a good plan look like, what are the options available to you as BPS is phased out, to make sure that your business is resilient and can thrive depending on the particular choices that you want to make around what you're farming, how you're farming, what you do, how much income you want to generate from public goods and schemes, whether they're government schemes or other ones, and what you want to do.
Do you think that we should make carbon footprint an inherent part of that business planning? Because to be honest, given the climate changes that we're facing, it wouldn't be a bad place to start, would it, for people to look at their carbon audit and think this is where we need to focus our energies to improve things?
Yeah, I think carbon audit, but also more broadly natural capital audit, because you can make it, you can generate income from other things other than carbon, and from biodiversity gain, for example, or water quality. Water companies are very interested in that too. So we think that we've already included an SFI. I was going to say on plans, that the problem is that farmers who think it's a good idea to plan will plan. They're not going to do it because the government tells them to. And if we put that as a barrier to entry to our schemes, that means people won't come in. So we want to go with the flow and support people to do the sort of planning that they want to do. And we know there's an increasing demand to do carbon audits, and that's quite a helpful way into thinking, actually, well, what are the other assets you've got in terms of natural capital, and what sort of income can you generate? You can do some of that already through the resilience fund, so you can, some of those offers include looking at some of these baselining for carbon and other natural capital type of assets. And we're also looking at whether to include something along those lines in SFI, where we would pay you to fund you to do a baseline kind of assessment of what the current situation is on your farm and where the opportunities are to generate an income for carbon and biodiversity and water quality. One of the issues around that is the lack of standards for how you do it, because there's 60 something different ways of calculating carbon on your farm, somebody was telling me. And there's another team in Defra that's looking at the private markets and how they work and how these sorts of things work, so that we can get some standards in place for the market, so that everybody can understand how to do it in a way that is verifiable and credible, and you're not wasting money on a snake oil salesman telling you they're doing a carbon audit, but it's not really telling you what you need to know. So we are looking at that to see whether we should put something into SFI to make it easier for people to get on and do those sorts of plans. This year we're paying for two types of plans, a nutrient management plan and an integrated pest management plan, and we're paying for professional qualified advisors to come to your farm and help you with that. So if you already do that for Red Tractor, but it's you doing it and you're ticking the boxes, we'll pay for a professional advisor to come and do a comprehensive assessment for you. And that you might, those sorts of things can flush out ways to save money, as well as ways to prevent water pollution and other such things. So that's one of the examples where it's good for the farm and good for the environment, really, to do that stuff.
In those early days as well, back in 2017 and 18, there was a great hope, wasn't there, to move away as far as we could from income foregone towards a system where we put a real value on the delivery of public goods. And we've not managed to do that, sadly. And
not
I do
yet.
wonder, no, not yet. Okay, well, I look forward to what you're going to say next in that case. But I do wonder whether that 2.4 billion is enough. Given all the challenges we've got, the environment, natural resources, climate, food, rural affairs, is that 2.4 million pounds enough?
We think in the short term it is, but if we have too much demand for schemes, that's a fantastic problem for me to have to deal with. So bring it on. Let's deal with that as it happens. We think there's going to be increasing private investment and there already is in some of these outcomes, and we've got to keep an eye on that, because we've got to make sure that we in government are doing something that's complementary to that. We don't want to crowd it out. So we want you to be able to earn money from carbon credits, from biodiversity net gain, from water companies, etc. So some of the funding for these activities is going to come through that route. And some of it through government. We have to keep an eye on this. We think at the moment, in the short term, that budget is of a size that means we can meet the demand that we've got and we can do the things that we need to do, but it will be for a future government to decide should that go up further. And I imagine that there will be pressure from the sector on that, but that's a matter for people who are elected rather than me. I will advise them on what's needed in order to be able to deliver all of this stuff, and at the moment I can see that we can deliver it within that 2.4 billion, and that 2.4 billion is protected for the Parliament, and it's survived 3 different spending reviews now, intact at the same level, so that we can, as we reduce basic payments, we can invest it through those schemes. On income forgone plus costs, so we've done a lot of work on this, and what income forgone plus cost means is what we work out how much to pay you in schemes based on the cost of doing the action we're asking you to do, establishing a lay or whatever it is, and also if you're going to be either reducing your production or taking some land out of production, say you're putting in some field margins or fencing off a watercourse and so to keep the livestock out, then we'll pay you for the income that you would have had on that area had you continued farming it. And those two things taken together give you the price. So we've been looking at different ways to set prices, including payment by results. So we just have a look at what you've done and pay you according to what results you've delivered. The thing about that is that people who are already very engaged in environmental activities and expert in how to do it love that, because they're very confident they're going to be able to get the results, and they know lots of different ways to get there. They're very invested in doing it. That's not the majority of farmers. Most farmers look at it and say, well, I can't rely on that. I want to know how much I'm going to get paid, otherwise I do these actions in good faith. What if I don't get the results because my slope isn't right, or my soil type isn't right, or the weather isn't right, or whatever? Does that mean I get no money? And then they don't want that level of uncertainty on the whole, on average. However, we think we don't think we should base the whole payment on payment by results. What we think we should do is have income forgone plus cost as the kind of base level payment for doing the action. And we think that's the fairest way to set that, because it's predictable, it's clear, it's certain, and it's transparent. It's the least worst way of doing it, basically. It's not perfect. But then we're going to have additional payments on top of that through CS Plus, so that if you do actions which are particularly the right action in the right place, so they're really going to have an impact, or if you do actions in the right combination to get really outstanding results, or if you do actions which are joined up with your neighbours, you can get bonus payments. And we've already put this in place in the England Woodland Creation Offer, where if you plant some trees, you get a payment. If you do it in a way that protects a watercourse, you get extra. If you do them in a way that protects biodiversity, you get extra. So you'll get your base level payment, but if you do these extra things to get really good results, then you get a bonus payment. And we're
Mm.
working on how those should work this year. So we're not at the end of the story yet on income forgone plus
That sounds
costs.
useful. That sounds useful. And I do remember being part of discussions about that some time ago, and thinking at that time that we always had to keep an eye on income foregone. It's one thing putting a value on something, but again, if that doesn't meet the income foregone, you need to be aware of income foregone anyway. To
Exactly.
use the two mechanisms, does make sense to me.
Yeah, we've got to combine them together so that you can get you've got the incentive there to go further and deliver better results. But if you just want to do the bog standard action, you can do that too, and you can know what income you're going to get, and it can be clear and certain for the length of your agreement. So we're trying to do a sort of best of both worlds kind of an option, really.
I'm going to focus on two more things really before we start to go through some of the questions that are coming in now. One is just to take that discussion really in terms of income foregone and I guess payment rates, I suppose, into that hill and upland sector as well. And you would have listened to those Farmer Today programs last week, and I heard James Rebank talking late last week on this as well. But income foregone in the upland sector means that they can deliver exactly the same high quality environmental outcome, but the income foregone calculation is much, much lower. And I think Defra's own predictions are that farm incomes in 2022-3 are going to be very, very low, about 16,300 or something. And the upland sector feels like it's being left behind through this process. And I know we're in transition, and I know that transition has always got a balance between the old schemes that we're moving away from and new schemes coming in. But the upland sector, you talked a little bit about HLS rollovers, and again, that's okay. But I think most upland farms I'm talking to are still seeing real pressures on their stocking levels on upland and on HLS rollovers. And again, that means that their income foregone is probably even greater, because it seems to me they're getting rollovers with the same payment rates but more pressure on their stocking levels. That is putting them in a more difficult situation. The options for the moment for the upland sector, and I would argue that the upland sector is already delivering a lot of environmental good and social good,
it is, and
could do an awful lot more too if the schemes and the structures were right.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. We think there's absolutely loads of potential in the uplands. So 3/4 of farmers in the uplands are already in a scheme of one sort or another. So there's lots of public goods being delivered. What we want is to see those farms being able to do more and get paid more and get recognised for the work they're doing. So on the kind of different prices for uplands and the rest of the country, out of the 280 options that will be available, there are about 250 now across all the schemes. 4 of those have different prices in the uplands. 3 of those are niche options. They're wood pasture and a couple of other things where we can see not very high levels of uptake. The one where there's some contention is the low to no input grassland standard, where the rate in the uplands is £98 and the rate in the lowlands is more like £150. That £98 is 6 times higher than it was 2 years ago. So we have definitely not left the uplands behind. We've increased that price 6-fold. So I encourage you to take a look at the actual facts if anybody's watching and see what's actually available there. And the reason the prices are different for those particular options is because the actions are different in the lowlands and the uplands. For all other options in countryside stewardship and SFI, the prices are based on the average income foregone across the whole country. So given that upland grazing livestock farms are the least profitable farms, they're actually going to make the biggest margin from that. So in fact, you can benefit more than other farms from almost all of the prices in schemes. So there are these very small number where there is a different price, and we'll keep that under review. We've seen the feedback and we'll carry on looking at that, but they are not the main story. They are not like of all the CS agreements, I think it was 8% of the amount we pay out is paid out on those 4 options. The rest are options where the price is set for the whole country, and if you're in the uplands, you'll be making a bigger margin than others. So if you're say you're a dairy farm. So options to do with livestock are based on all livestock everywhere, including dairy cows as well as sheep. And if you're farming sheep, your income in general, on average, is likely to be lower than dairy, but your price you're getting paid for the scheme is the same. So your margin will be higher. So I wouldn't like anybody to listen to that and think, oh dear, it's not worth me bothering. I'm going to get a rubbish price, because on the whole, you're not. And the one other thing I would say, I did listen to James. I've been to his farm as well, and it was brilliant to go and see what he's doing a couple of years ago when I was very first in my role, actually. And we had a fantastic day. He showed me around and showed me what he was doing. And I've been to a few other farms in that area as well. And there's a real sort of there's some exciting stuff happening around that area for people who are combining nature and food production. James said in that interview he's hoping to go into higher tier, and actually that'll be okay because he will get a fair rate for what he's doing.
He did. Yeah, he did.
So listen to that bit of the interview as well.
He did.
And the problem with higher tier is that it's at the moment it's constrained in terms of how many people can get into it. What we're working on there is trying to reduce those constraints so that people who want to go into higher tier can get into it. And we're doing that by trying to focus the advisory capacity not on doing administrative work but on actually value adding work. Where we don't think you actually should need to get advice for the option, we're just going to remove that requirement. We'll bolster the capacity where it's needed so that we can allow more people to get into higher tier and do what James is doing and what he said he was going to do, which actually he said would be very good and he would get well
absolutely
paid for it.
He did say that, and I heard Mark Spencer sort of say exactly the same on Saturday morning, I think, on Farming Today. Do you know, it's interesting.
It's important to say though, like, you know, we've got nothing but respect for James and everybody else who's farming in the uplands, and we will carry on. Even if the conversation is difficult at times and you've got critical things to say, it's important for us to hear what's being said, and it's important for us to understand how upland farmers are feeling. We don't want upland farmers to feel left behind. Of course not.
Listen, I don't know if this exists or not, but the other thing I wonder whether it's missing in our SFI pilot group, you know, a number of the farmers involved in that group are keeping a very, very close eye on the financial situation, to what extent SFI is starting to replace a decline in BPS, you know, and the message is not all bad, I'd have to say. You know, if you do things right and you get involved in the right things, then you can replace that money. I don't think that people are necessarily seeing that picture. And I do wonder whether there is more work that needs to be done to demonstrate how farmers can, if they choose to, replace that income.
Yeah, we were just talking about this yesterday, actually, about the value of producing some case studies to say, if you were in this situation with this much BPS, this much from a scheme, etc., here are the things that you could, as your BPS goes down, here are the sorts of choices that you've got. And there is a wide range of choices depending on what you want to do. You can get grants, as I mentioned, to make your farm more efficient, improve your animal health and welfare, and they can save you a lot of money, those interventions on animal health and welfare. You can have a free annual health and welfare review where we can see productivity improvements, the significant productivity improvements from advice just about which type of medicine to give your sheep to get a much better result. You can make a productivity improvement just with that intervention. And then also schemes. So we're looking at ways to give out that information in a bit more of a sort of practical farm-based way to go, like on the farm. If you're this type of farm, let's say you're a 100-acre sheep farm, this is the kind of money, pounds, shillings and pence that's involved. So the danger with doing that is there's no such thing as a typical farm, which is why I've resisted doing it before, because as soon as you do that, you show it to somebody and they go, well, that's not what my farm's like, I can't do those things.
You know, we're behind all of these schemes, to be honest, but we're absolutely fully behind the pathway animal health and welfare scheme. And I remember with my first chair when I was at NSA, John Geldard, going to the Animal Health and Welfare Board for England and presenting a scheme that isn't a million miles away from what we're talking about now. And we were dismissed it with fairly short order at that time, but again,
sometimes these things take time.
They do take time, really. And I would just say, just to back up what you said there, you know, it's not just about improving productivity, is it? You know, to get the animal health and the welfare of the animal right, you'll improve productivity, you'll reduce your carbon footprint, you will have a positive environmental improvement as well. And
it's less stressful as well.
Well, there's no joy in looking after sick animals, you know, absolutely no joy whatsoever. I think my one criticism of that program, one thing just to flag with that program, is that it needs to be adequately funded. And at the moment, I think if we could do with some more money going into the animal health and welfare pathway, that would be my view. And maybe some more gradation between, you know, different size flocks as well. At the moment, if I've got 20 sheep, I get £436 to cover a vet coming out. You know, someone with 2,000 sheep gets exactly the same. And I wonder whether that needs to be addressed or fine-tuned as we go forward.
We will. So it's not. I don't think there is a shortage of budget for it. I think we're rolling it out gradually because it's new technology and a new service and a new policy. And want to make sure it's working as we gradually scale it up. So at the moment you can get a vet visit for one species per farm. We'll extend that to multiple species as we continue to scale it up. And the way that we manage the budget, by the way, within the 2.4 billion is we're very attentive to where are we seeing demand. So we make planning
Yeah.
assumptions about what we're expecting to see. But for example, in countryside stewardship, we've had a 94% increase in the number of agreements in the last 3 years, and we've met all of that demand from within the budget. And we do that by watching and seeing, right, well, we'll reduce the budget here and increase the budget there, and we'll keep flexing it to make sure we're following the demand that the sector's got. So if we see more demand than we're expecting for the animal health and welfare pathway, then we'll obviously take a look at that and see, can we flex the budget to meet it?
Yeah.
What we really want to be able to do is follow the demand and meet what the sector wants. We're not setting the budget in pillars in advance and saying, well, that's that budget and that's that, because we've got that flexibility now.
Okay, I'm going to go into some of the questions that have been posed now, if I can. These are 2 or 3 pre-submitted questions. Firstly, and we may have covered some of this already, so apologies if we have a skip over it. If we have, how does Defra envisage the various strands of the schemes being rolled out to non-BPS claimants? Might there be rewards for good practice, health and grassland management or improvement? So it's really a question about, when we move away from that BPS eligibility.
Yeah, so you don't have to be in BPS to go into countryside stewardship or for our grants already, but for SFI you do need to be in BPS, and that is basically a blunt way of us making sure it's farmers that come into the scheme and get the money. Obviously we're going to delink basic payments in 2024, so that won't be a useful basis anymore, but also it means that if you've got less than 5 hectares of entitlements, you can't come into the scheme, and we do want smaller holdings to be able to come in. But what we've got to work out is, where do you draw the line? Because I'm pretty sure you wouldn't like my allotment to get SFI payments on it, even if I was selling things from it, which I don't do. But we do want people with smaller holdings and smaller fields, etc., to be able to get access. So we've got to be able to define in a way that is credible and fair where the new line is, to define what sort of farms can come in. But in particular, what we've got in mind is smaller horticulture type outfits and intensive poultry, where they're on a smaller footprint, but there's no reason why they shouldn't be coming into schemes if that's what they want to do. And we've said we'll do that after 2024. So for this year and next year, it will still be based on BPS entitlements for SFI. But you can get, like I say, you can go into countryside stewardship and you can get access to the grants. So there is still plenty there on offer for you if you are smaller than 5 hectares. But then we'll look to, from 25, expand beyond that and that BPS entitlement and into a wider range of farms.
And am I right in thinking that pathway, the aspiration would be that we would make that change earlier, because that we'd have an awful lot of sheep farmers that would be ineligible? Yes.
And that's I don't think that is based on BPS now. I can't remember exactly where we landed on that.
It is at the moment.
But I think we didn't do that for policy reasons. We did it because that was the way of understanding. We already know who you are, and that means we know that you're a farmer, and because we already know where you are and what you are and all that kind of thing. We're looking in Defra at this question much more broadly, actually, because where we'd like to get to is that we manage information about farms in a way that means you don't have to tell different agencies the same information multiple times, and we can be confident that we've got a canonical record of what's the farm, what livestock have you got on it, and you can use that for all these different purposes, whether it's grants or regulatory purposes or whatever else. But that's a complicated piece of work, and we've got to make sure we do that in a way that is actually advantageous to farmers and isn't seen as a kind of threatening thing, but a helpful thing that is actually saving you time and hassle. So yes, we do plan to move away from that for the animal health and welfare review as well.
We haven't got time to talk about this at all, but just a plea, I know you're doing this, but a plea to make sure that we consider the livestock information program at all stages through this, because there's been a massive investment in that program.
Yes.
And we need to,
I had a brief period of looking after that program when it was between senior responsible owners for a bit, and Paul Caldwell, the chief executive of the RPA, is now what we call in government the SROs, the person responsible for that program. And he and I work in partnership on this program and have been discussing exactly that. If we're building something for livestock information program, why don't we use it for everything else? Instead of having different programs building the same thing multiple times. That's exactly what we're talking about. And we're also working with colleagues at APHA, AFA, they don't like to be called AFA, they like to be called APHA. So I'm always correcting myself. We're also working with them on this same issue, and with our colleagues in technology department to see how can we line up everything to make it so we're spending the least amount of money to get the best possible result for everybody.
Great, that's good. Moving on then, so I think you've covered this, but it'd be great to re-emphasize it. Some people have raised their concerns that grazing tenancies upon renewal now are changing from 5-year lets to 12-month lets. That's very much a trend that's going on through landlords, through the landowning community, really. Will there be any provision within the scheme for those on less secure tenancies? Now, you've answered that in relation to SFI, haven't you? So on a 12-month agreement, you would be able to enter SFI.
Yes, you would. And even if it's a rolling license, if it's a rolling grazing license. So if you're on Ministry of Defence land, the way they manage their tenancies tends to be on a rolling license in that way. So yes, you can come into SFI. There is a wider set of issues here. One is, so in SFI, it's actions that you do in the course of your farming where you wouldn't need landlord consent and you can have those shorter agreements. What we'd be looking at is how do we apply that sort of flexibility to options that are longer term, so that you can, so that we create the conditions for landlords and tenants to go into schemes in a kind of partnership kind of a way, so that tenants can be in the schemes for the duration of their tenancy and not be excluded just because their tenancy isn't 10 years long from an option that's that long. It's worth it for anybody who's not aware of the ROC review. We commissioned a piece of work by experts, chaired by Kate Rock, who is a tenant herself, but also involving other kind of experts on tenancy, to look at the wider range of tenancy issues, because this question of how long are tenancies, how do they work, are they fair, how do we resolve disputes, what are the tax incentives around tenancies, and all those sorts of questions are also relevant here. And the ROC review covered that wider range of issues, and the government is due to respond to that shortly. So to keep your eye out for that as well, if you want to see what government's view is on the wider range of tenancy issues. But certainly within our schemes, we've already done a lot in SFI. We will carry on applying as much flexibility as we can, and we can't be intervening in the private relationship between a tenant and a landlord, but we can create the conditions for there to be a reasonable arrangement agreed between tenant and landlord, so tenants can benefit from the schemes.
And can you see that working with even the hedgerow standards within SFI?
Yeah.
You can,
definitely. Definitely. Yeah, because what we're asking you to do is manage the hedgerow, which you'll have to do anyway as part of your tenancy normally. So we're paying you to do that in a way that's good for nature, so that you leave the berries in place for the birds over winter on some of the hedgerows, for example. So it's options where you're changing the land use in an either very long-term or permanent way, or the value of the land where the landlord has got a legitimate interest, and that's right, and we should respect that interest, but we don't want to therefore just exclude tenants from those options. We want to be able to have a partnership type approach.
It might be worth just talking about the types of agreements that short-term tenancies wouldn't be eligible for, because they would be eligible, I understand, for pathway. They would be eligible for capital grants.
Yeah, and they are eligible for CS, but you have to get your landlord to underwrite it. So if you're signing up to a countryside stewardship agreement for 5 years and your tenancy isn't 5 years long, or an action that's longer than that, say 10 years, then you need to get your landlord to also validate that they kind of support the application at the moment. But we need to simplify that and make it as accessible as possible, really.
Excellent. Okay, let's move on to the next question. Does Defra have the capacity to work with industry to ensure there is scope and opportunity for the next generation of new entrants and sufficient access to land? Competition for land at the moment is more intense than ever, and it probably will continue to be that way as well. I would imagine pressure on land is you can't see that being relieved at all.
No, because in particular, the pressure on land is coming from a wider range of quarters now, isn't it? So there's pressure on land to be used for the purposes of storing carbon or energy or housing, or biodiversity or whatever. So there's a lot of competing demand on land. So the government's committed to producing a land use framework. And it's in response to the food strategy document by Henry Dimbleby. The government committed to producing a land use framework where it's looking at these competing demands and how to manage them in kind of broad terms. So we're looking at that. What was it? Sorry, what was it? I've lost my train of thought.
Well, it was really about the next generation.
That's right. Yes. So demand for land from new entrants. So we have got pilots underway at the moment for new entrants, where we're focusing primarily on how you get your business up and running and having kind of incubator style advice. We know that a lot of folk actually are most worried about access to capital and access to land, and the kind of demise of county farms in most areas, although there are one or two exceptions, is part of the contributors to that, isn't it? So we're keeping that policy under review. We'll during that pilot, we'll keep the policy under review, and the plan is we certainly will have interventions to support new entrants, and we're always open to feedback about what they should look like. So if the person asking that question wants to get in touch, I'll put them in touch with the team that are working on that, and they can have a bit more detailed chat.
You'll be aware that we've had a next generation program for probably approaching 9 years now, I guess, and I think increasingly people coming into that program, well, I would say that the number and quality of and the caliber of those young people coming in is really exciting. Actually, it really bodes well for the future. But there's some real opportunities in this whole reintegration of grass and livestock within arable areas, and that is somewhere where sheep farming just fits so well.
Yeah, and I've seen a few really interesting examples of that, and a couple of sort of initiatives getting started where there's trying to match arable farmers with sheep farmers, so the sheep farmer can go and kind of rotate around an arable area, which is, I think, really exciting. And that's how lots of sheep farmers start, isn't it? They get I met a sheep farmer who started by grazing his sheep in a churchyard in the local area, and then he gradually got more places to graze his sheep, and then when a tenancy came up, the landlord knew him and knew that he was like a decent, hard-working guy, and was like, right, come and have this tenancy, you're first in the queue, mate. And that's a route in for a lot of people, isn't it? It is,
and these people can keep their fixed costs really, really low as well, and make a success of their in financial terms.
So there's a real opportunity there, given the growing interest in the arable sector in getting livestock back integrated into the system, because it saves, it's good for the soil.
And that relates back to the whole SFI approach of trying to improve soils and all those sorts of things. So that's good. Okay. Okay, Max Wade has asked the question, a very specific question. I'm currently in a CS agreement with many options, including GS4. Is it going to be tricky to make sure I'm not double funding such things, as it looks like some options such as
intermediate
grassland standard might not be able to do due to the double funding issue?
Yeah, so for those not familiar, what the double funding issue is that there are some options in SFI which are pay for the same actions that we pay for in existing options in CS, or which are incompatible with things that you might be doing in CS. And we can't obviously pay you to do the exact same thing on the same piece of land twice through different schemes, because that's not fair on everybody else if you're getting paid twice for it and they're getting paid once. And we can't get good value for public money by doing that. So we have a rule which is that if we're already paying you to do something on that land, we can't pay you again. And if we're paying you to do something that's incompatible, then you can't pay you to do something that's incompatible on the same piece of land. However, we've been looking at this in terms of how the SFI 2023 offer will work to try and make sure we minimize any disadvantage to anybody, to make sure there's no disadvantage to anybody. Because the way the soil standards work at the moment is if you're doing anything that's currently in the soil standards in CS, then you can't come into the soil standards at all. And that means that makes it very difficult for people who are already in CS. We're looking at how we revise that for the 2023 offer, and we'll publish some information about that in April to confirm it. But the rules are specific to like a particular piece of land. So if you've got GS4 on a particular field, you can still have SFI on other fields. Or if you've got a field margin in countryside stewardship, you can still put SFI in the middle of the field. So I wouldn't be put off by the worry about the double funding rules. The thing to do is log into the system, because in our system we show you automatically what is your eligible land area for each of the SFI standards. So if you've already got a CS option, it will show that grayed out, and it will show you where else you can put your SFI options. But also, if you've been looking at it so far using the 2022 soil standards, then I really encourage you to have a look at the information we publish in April and the service when we for the 2023 offer, the expanded offer, when we open it up this summer, because hopefully it'll be a bit more flexible for you to be able to get in.
Excellent. Thanks, Janet. Dan Phipps is our chair, actually. He's chair of NSA. He's asking a question. What is the strategy? This is a longer term question. What is the strategy to monitor the success of Defra's policies, or be them co-created with industry? How quickly could the ship be turned if we spot unintended weaknesses in them?
So there's a few different ways we do this. So at the there's a few different cycles. So we have like a almost daily cycle of someone's told us there's a problem with the way a system is working, or a piece of guidance not being clear enough, or a rule not working, and we can correct that within a few days, and we do that all the time. So there's a sort of rapid cycle, feedback and iteration at a kind of micro level where we're tweaking things all the time. Then there's an annual cycle where if we're doing multiple rounds of the same grant fund, or if we're having an annual update of what the SFI offer looks like or the CS offer looks like, then we'll do a review of whatever's in that offer, and that's what we've done for SFI this year, and update it based on all the feedback that we've had. Then you've got your kind of, so you'll see every time we offer a round of grants, we've changed it a bit. Every time we introduce a new round of SFI or countryside stewardship, we'll have updated it, expanded it, improved it. Then you've got a larger cycle of like 3 years for the SFI pilot. So there's some things we're looking at within the pilot where we take learning, and we have done that and apply it to the main scheme. But there's also a 3-year review of like, what outcomes did we get from that? What can we learn, and how do we feed that in? And then there's a longer term review of how are we actually delivering the outcomes we're expecting to see here? So if we're paying lots of farmers to do these actions, are we actually seeing improvements in soil health, in biodiversity and water quality? And that has to take place over a longer cycle, because it takes a while to do the action, see the impacts and reflect on it. So that's more like a kind of 5-year feedback loop, a rolling 5-year feedback loop, where you see, you look each year at the outcome of maybe a 2 or 3 year evaluation program, and you can continue refining your policies on that basis. So we're looking to make sure we're on track for our outcomes. We have a theory of change, which is to get this outcome. We think that if we pay farmers to do this action, that's what's going to get us there. And that's based on research and science and evidence. And then we keep that under review. So we've got a sort of pretty hefty program of monitoring, evaluation and learning, much more so than we had in previous schemes, because we know we're going to have to justify this money on an ongoing basis. And we need to be able to show that we're learning and improving, and science will move on and practice will move on, and we'll learn things. We've got to build that in. One of the things we're looking at is, rather than having what the sign of success of this program is that you don't need another one in 10 years time, because what we've built is a self-improving machine. So the idea is that you review, say, a third of the options in schemes each year on a rolling basis. Everyone knows when each option is up for review. You gather all the evidence, you do a big review, and nothing ever gets more than 2 or 3 years out of date, so that it's an ongoing process of improvement and evolution. And then you don't have to, you don't just do a program like this, leave it as it is, and then come back in 10 years time realizing that it's now got completely out of date, which is what we've done previously.
2 connected questions. One, I always felt that and I think it was very much George Eustace's initiative, but the agricultural partnerships where we held, where Defra held 3 sessions, one at Cirencester, one over in Belfast, I think, and one up in Scotland. Yeah, that's dried up, and I always felt that was a really healthy initiative in terms of bringing the research community together, the academia with industry, to really have an open discussion and dialogue about the challenges that we all face, and how we were going to go, and how we were going to apply the best practice, the knowledge that we have as well. And it's stopped. Why is that?
I don't know why that is, actually. I'm not familiar with those. I will find out though. There you go. There's always something that I pick up from these conversations that I hadn't known before. I've made a note. I'll go and I'll find out what happened to those. And
on a slightly different topic, but very, very much relating back to Dan's question, I guess, the long-term success. I mean, I think we had Daniel Zeichner, Labour spokesperson for your shadow minister for food and rural affairs, back in January, and I sense that their ambitions, their challenges are no different for any government coming, and it is for the Conservative government really. But how confident are you that if there was to be a governmental change, that we'll be on a constant track going forward?
So you always have change when you see a different minister, even within the same government. You see different emphasis, different priorities, and things change over time, and that's part of being in a democracy. So I think I'm not here to try and keep everything fixed. I'm here to serve whoever the government of the day is. But so there's always some uncertainty involved in that. But as things look right now, certainly the current government is committed to this as a long-term endeavour, and everything that the opposition is saying is that they also are. But they'll obviously have discussions about what the emphasis should be, what the budget should be, who do the best job, and all that kind of thing. Those things are not for me to comment on. But the general direction of travel is supported by all the main parties. The debate is always about how fast do you go, how big's the budget, exactly what you're doing, is it really working for everybody, are you leaving anybody behind, all those sorts of questions, which are obviously the right questions they ought to be asked by anybody. So we are expecting a reasonably steady ship in terms of the direction of travel overall, but we're also always expecting there to be fluctuations and ebbs and flows and different things coming to the fore at any given time. And a program like ours is like a farm. You've got to be resilient. You've got to be able to have a plan, but be able to flex and adapt it as you see what the weather's like.
And a lot of people in our industry still very clearly remember, policies that focused entirely on food production, that then dried up and focused entirely on environmental improvement. And we seem to be on a trajectory now of more holistic thinking, I guess, where we're aware of those multiple aims. Yeah,
we're trying not to do a pendulum swing.
Absolutely.
And instead, or have a cycle of, the reason we're not having a new scheme called local nature recovery and instead evolving countryside stewardship is because farmers kept kept saying to us, why do you do this? You have this cycle where you start up a new thing, it's rubbish for 3 years, you finally get it any good, and then you get somebody new coming in going, oh, I'm going to start a new one, and then it's rubbish for 3 years again. So stop doing that, and stop swinging from either its food or its nature, and instead try and occupy this kind of middle ground where it's you're trying to do both hand in hand in a genuinely sustainable way. And then that's where the middle ground is for all the political parties and all the stakeholders, and for farmers actually, who many of whom already think in that way, of course. So they don't need
and there will always be fine tuning, won't there? And I mean, there has been already, I guess, in terms of the importance of food production and food security in relation to the Ukraine war, and I suppose supply chain disruption through COVID as well. So,
and also we'll have the best of intentions, but things won't always work how we expect them to. So we'll just, like for SFI, our thinking was that bundling together in standards would make it more straightforward for farmers to take part, and that has been the case for some. However, it's been too restrictive for others, and it's off-putting that they have to do this package of things, and that's why the 2023 offer is much more disaggregated, and it's much more pick and mix what you want to do, and we keep learning and adapting as we go as to what actually works when it hits reality.
Excellent. Okay, the final question that I've got now, and it is coming up towards 9:30 anyway. This is from Liz Griffiths, who you know very well.
Yes, I do.
Yeah. We welcome the funding for animal health and welfare review. However, with vets costing £160 an hour, this appears out of kilter when compared to funding for pest and nutrient management. For sheep farmers with a payment of £436, it will not be a free vet's visit. Well, that goes back to the point I made earlier. For me, with 20 sheep, it would be, but for Liz with 1,000 sheep, it only partially covers the cost, I guess.
Yeah, we will keep a close eye on this. So we have set those prices with careful collaboration with the sector and with vets and with other experts to make sure that we have calibrated them as right as they can be. But that's one of the things we'll keep an eye on as we roll this out. So are the visits actually useful? Do they result in the things that we want to see? Are they helpful to farmers? Are the prices right? Is the service working smoothly? Are all questions that we'll keep under review as we roll it out. So I'll be interested to find out. Liz, let me know how much it did actually cost, and keep us informed so that we can feed that in. Maybe we can pick this up in one of our pilot meetings. We could get the animal health and welfare team along.
A number of us are involved with, and we'll be keeping a close eye on the next stages of the pathway to where it moves from the annual review to an endemic disease control program.
Yeah. We were just talking about that internally the other day, actually, about what the plan's looking like for that, and the work is progressing on that. And that's about support to eradicate or protect your herd or flock from endemic diseases, and we want to crack on and introduce that. And there's also the animal health and welfare grants that are going to come in this year that are also part of the pathway. So it will gradually there's more and more stuff becoming available along that line. And that, as you said earlier, those interventions are things that can save you cost, make your life less stressful, be good for the environment, and be good for carbon emissions, and be good for kind of all of the and good for food production because it reduces waste. So it's a kind of massive sweet spot of action really there that we really want to support.
Absolutely. Okay, look, it's 9:30. We could keep this going for hours, couldn't we? We've not really touched on very much on food production. We've not touched on trade. I know trade is a different department within government. But there's a lot more we could talk about, but we want to leave it now. And if we do, then we've probably got the chance of inviting you back again to talk. Talk again, which would be
always
a pleasure.
Always happy to turn up and engage, as you know, and thanks very much for having me this morning for the questions and discussion.
No, it's a pleasure. And I would like to just to thank you very much for coming and spending your morning with us. Stay in this role as long as you possibly can. And,
I will. I've got no intention of going anywhere unless I get sacked, which I hopefully won't, but you never know.
And if that was to change, then make sure you leave the culture of change. It does seem to be sweeping with Defra behind, because it is something that we see that there's definitely been a culture change in Defra compared to 6, 7, 8 years ago. There's absolutely no doubt about that.
Yeah, and it's definitely not just me either. That's a whole organisation thing, and in the RPA as well. It's brilliant to be part of. Really great privilege. It's the best job in government, I always say.
Good. Okay, well, just a final thank you again to our sponsors, Rathbones and Roythorns. Thanks very much, Janet. Thanks to everyone that's joined us this morning. And again, this will be available catch up on the NSA website probably within the next 24 hours or so. But thanks, Janet, and we'll speak again soon.
Brilliant. Thanks very much.
Goodbye all.